Welcome back to Coffee Kurosawa, the podcast where a film geek and a film fan swap ideas about the movies they love. I'm Ben Filipkowski, your resident film geek.
And I am Farrah Sarpkaya, a person who loves film, but like in a super chill, I swear this was an accident sort of way.
And this week we are watching Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, a stop-motion film released in 2022. Farrah, this was your pick, so why don't you give us a quick summary?
So, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio is exactly what it sounds like. Starring a truly incredible cast, including Gregory Mann, Ewan McGregor, Christoph Waltz, Ron Perlman, Cate Blanchett, and Tilda Swinton, it's Pinocchio, but retold in stop motion and set during the rise of fascism in Italy, ahead of and during World War II. The film's basic plot, as many folks are probably familiar with from the original book or one of its many remakes, is that a woodworker creates a puppet and wishes it would come to life. It does, and with the added bonus of a lie detector for a nose, the puppet makes some mischief. He runs away, he gets his father into trouble, all sorts of stuff, and eventually he learns what it means to be a real boy. This mostly holds true for Del Toro's vision, but this one, Pinocchio dies 3 times. Once because the adults are fighting over him, once because he mocked Benito Mussolini, the fascist leader of Italy during parts of World War II, and once as a sacrifice to save his family. Some other notable differences in this version of Pinocchio is that Geppetto's real son dies in World War I in an airstrike of their little town, and he is drunk when he carves Pinocchio about 20 years later. The carnival that Pinocchio runs away to later on is run by a man who has bought into the fascist vision, so the show is entirely propaganda and gets more so as time goes on. And Pleasure Island, as we see it in the Disney version, and the Lost Boys therein, are actually young men who have been quote-unquote recruited to train for war and to become men. And rather than a wail and a sneeze, the group reunites in a terrible dogfish and escapes via a blowhole and a terrible explosion. And in the end, it is a wish from Sebastian J. Cricket, not Jiminy Cricket, that brings the boy back to life. A real boy and an immortal boy, at last. He's still a puppet, but he is in every way that matters, a real boy. Perhaps not quite it. That is the third version of this summary that I wrote. The other 2 were maybe 500 or 600 words long, but that's the gist. Go watch the movie if you haven't seen it. It is a heck of a thing. We'll be here when you get back. But Ben, you watched the movie, or at least I assume you did. So as the person whose movie choice this was not, talk to me about how you felt about this version of Pinocchio and your first impressions. Did you like it?
If I had $1 for every time Guillermo del Toro has told a story about fascism and fairy tales, I'd have $2, which is not a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. The other movie in that incredibly lame joke is, of course, Pan's Labyrinth, which came out in 2006, I believe, which is about a young girl in Francoist Spain during the final years of the Second World War, and her encounters with threats both fantastical and terrifyingly real. I'm bringing up Pan's Labyrinth because there's absolutely a through line with the look and feel of that film and this one, even if this one's maybe a bit more accessible to family audiences. I think broadly I like this movie, with the caveat that I don't think I'm a big fan of the source material. I'm not really into the Pinocchio story, and I'm not really a fan of the Disney movie. I think I watched it a ton as a kid and probably burnt myself out on it a bit. I'm absolutely a bit more interested in what transplanting this cautionary tale about a wooden boy being an absolute brat to an explicitly fascist setting means. And if I'm being honest, I don't know that I see, at least at first glance, a compelling reason for that change. It's not that it doesn't work, but I wish that it mined that setting for a bit more thematic material. I don't know if the setting has as big of an impact on the story as it might appear at first glance. Pinocchio is always a cautionary tale, right? Broadly, the original stories are about how this wooden boy gets himself into trouble through his impulsiveness, his temper, his poor decisions, and he grows and sees the error of his ways, gaining some wisdom, becoming a real boy, etc., etc., etc. So the idea of the authoritarian state, particularly with Mussolini appearing as a character and his black shirts on full display, it kind of invites greater focus on those themes. But the movie seems less concerned with the actual specifics of why fascism is bad and why it takes hold, in favor of focusing on the moral, emotional, and spiritual growth of Pinocchio. And as we see in this, Pinocchio does not become a literal real boy. He's still made of wood when the credits roll. But he gains immense empathy and humanity through his journeys and experiences. He doesn't so much speak truth to power as he does extend empathy to other characters he finds, and it discovers kind of like the absurdity in the world around him and in the fascism around him. And I think that is kind of actually extremely resonant and beautiful. And I think the movie has a lot to say about mortality, about experiencing and enjoying life, and about helping the people you care about more than it has about, the perils of an authoritarian state. Maybe there's a bigger thing here about the fact that being yourself in a state determined to mold you into yet another soldier is an act of radical rebellion. I don't know. So thematically, I have to admit, I do struggle with this one. I almost wish at times it leaned a little harder on that new setting to find those thematic touchstones, but maybe by not engaging fully on those notes, it winds up having a lot more to say. I don't know. Plus, it is gorgeous, so you can't go wrong with that. Guillermo del Toro is this kind of like wonderful genius. I follow him on social media, and every Sunday he seems to be like making and painting a new model, which is just kind of fun to follow along with. Anyways, that's a complete aside on my part, and I've already said a lot about this, so I'm going to kind of throw it back to you here, because, yeah, I got a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, for the audience at home, we spent a solid hour and a half before hitting record talking about this to make sure we could stay vaguely on the rails, because I think we both have a lot of feelings about this movie, both as the movie itself and also the context in which we are talking about it. So let's drop some context for you all. We are recording this episode on President's Day, February 17th, 2025. There's a lot of global unrest going on. We've heard a lot of things in the news. We are up in Canada, and we are experiencing, some unprecedented times, but also maybe precedented times. So as we approach Pinocchio, the first thing we really started to talk about and really wanted to dive into, separate from that, is how the medium in which you present your story, and in this case, stop motion, puppets, and a story about a puppet who becomes a real boy, changes the story. So first, let's look at that. Pinocchio in the original is a little wooden puppy. It is a marionette without his strings. And they do it in stop motion. And I love that. That brings me so much joy, because the artists brought Pinocchio to life. They made him a real boy, along with the rest of the puppets. And so if we are looking at, the challenges that this film went through, I think it was roughly 15 years from its conception all the way till its release. Del Toro was insistent that it was a stop-motion movie. Even though they were having a heck of a time getting funding, all of this, he was like, no, it is going to be stop-motion. And so, if we just get a little in the weeds here, if you were a director, Ben,
Yeah.
and you were making a movie about puppets,
Yeah.
is it a joke that you're making? It's not a joke that you're making it with puppets, but what would you say would be your impetus of I think I should make a movie about puppets with puppets, because that's just too good. It's too real.
I mean, there's I'd be lying if there's not a part of me that would be that's funny. I think if I was doing this, I'd probably be doing it for the bit. But we also talked, you and I, about there's a bit of historical in-joke, kind of, maybe, about the fact that this is a story about a puppet set in fascist Italy in World War II, which, famously, Italy became a puppet state of Nazi Germany in the last few years because Mussolini's iron grip on the country was not so iron after all. It was extremely brittle. Maybe it was made of wood. I don't know. Maybe that's another little joke there. But the idea of a puppet being this kind of central figure in this story, the Disney movie has the iconic I have no strings to hold me down. That I don't think there's a single point in this adaptation of that original story where anyone kind of comments that he's a puppet without strings. It's kind of like a conceit in the carnival show.
Um, I mean, the first carnival show, I think he acts like he literally ties strings to
Yeah,
Pinocchio, and Count Velope does say, like, you may be a puppet without strings, but I am your puppet master, or I am your
right.
master, or something to that effect. So he
Yeah,
does
yeah, yeah.
very literally call it out, but it's less of a, oh, you're a puppet without strings. It's
Yeah,
more of a, I am your boss and you
yeah,
must do what I say sort
yeah,
of thing. So you could argue it either way.
yeah. And I guess that kind of like lends itself to this idea that like I have a note about this, but like you can probably say something about some of these broad thematic ideas. Uh, like Mussolini has his line about like he loves puppets, and there's kind of like it kind of calls to mind, at least for me, this idea of like in an authoritarian state, a lot of the figures in charge of like public institutions are just
Mhm.
puppets of the dictator at large. So
Yep.
there's kind of some thematic stuff there, but the movie's not really dwelling on it. I find, the Pinocchio's status as a puppet is kind of secondary in some ways.
Mhm.
Like he's a boy who's made out of wood seems to be the greater
Yeah.
focus.
No, that's fair. One who has been, and it's very clearly like mostly raw wood. Like he's been somewhat stripped and prepped by Geppetto, but like you see the other marionettes that he's made in the past, and they're beautiful, very human like. Whereas Pinocchio just looks like a log with some sticks that got stuck on. And that's, he is unshaped by the world as he is unshaped by Geppetto, in the heaviest of metaphors as a father and son could be. Um, I will say that, obviously there is some strings and levies and levers and all sorts of things with stop motion, but there is very obviously a distinct difference between marionettes and stop motion, or
Mhm.
puppets and stop motion, where stop motion is the artist, or the puppet master, I suppose, moves incrementally over and over and over again. Each of the puppets take a photo and set ad nauseum for 940 days, I believe, was the length of this recording for this film. Whereas a marionette, as we see with Spazzatura, is literally controlling the strings live action in real time, right? And part of the filming of this movie, I think I mentioned off camera too, is that Del Toro auditioned the animators to see who did what characters the best, or in his vision, I should say. And so, literally, each of the animators are bringing their own characters to life in the same way that Pinocchio is brought to life in the reductive, like, let's go back all the layers. And I think there's something really cool about that,
Yeah.
that we as humans bring those stories to life. And I know I'm probably super reading into it more than I should, but also I really enjoy that part of it, that
Yeah.
this is a very visual film, obviously, because Del Toro's style is so distinct no matter what he does. And they are bringing to life a work of art, 200 years in the making sort of thing.
Well, what you're saying about like you're reading too much into it, I would argue like that's kind of the point of our conversation today, is that we are reading a lot into it, because I think
Yes.
like the idea behind what we want to talk about with this is this notion of the telling of a story and the choices you make in telling that story change the meaning, or at least the meaning that people can infer from something. So kind of what we are talking around a lot in this episode today boils down to close reading. So like the literary concept of like examining a text and trying to find detail in the context in which it was created, in the text itself, and in the context in which we're interpreting it. So, I mean, all my talk about fascism just a few minutes ago probably tells you a lot, that I've been reading a lot about fascism over the last few months.
Who can say why?
Yeah.
Uh,
So yeah, like
yeah.
so I think that there's certainly, and certainly we talked about this ahead of hitting record, but like we're talking about like bringing something to life and finding those things within it. I think part of my struggle with this movie is that I'm kind of like, no, like mind that fascism stuff and, show Pinocchio
Yeah.
beating up the fascists, which does not make logical sense for the story that they are trying to tell. But we kind of, we were bringing our own context to it. And yeah, I think that, like, I think that this movie ends in a really beautiful spot. And through the conversation that you and I had and our reading of it, I think I've come around a bit more to, like, okay, so the setting it matters, but maybe I was putting too much emphasis on that on my end.
Yeah, I mean, I not to delve too deep in the specifically like let's beat up the fascists part because we'll talk about that later. But like he, you know, he does have moments of that, and those messages, the way they're shown and the way they're interpreted today, right now in 2025 versus even just back in 2022 when this was released. We were kind of on the tail end of the height of COVID. People were very slowly starting to emerge from their homes. There was, changes in the political landscape in the US. The world felt like it was on fire in a lot of different ways, as it often is. Having a film like this that was, and puppets are traditionally like for children. Puppet shows were very popular. I mean, Geppetto makes marionettes. They're used for puppets for kid shows. But a movie for adults with Nazis, with fascists, whatever, presented like this to us with a classic film or a classic tale from our childhoods, it lands real different not 3 years later.
Oh, yeah.
And that's like all of those things culminate into this weird kind of sense of today, I want this to be more about the punching of the Nazis, whereas back in 22, that was kind of set dressing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was an interesting context. It was an interesting way to see the narrative around a little boy just being a little boy and not even standing up to Mussolini, just being like, oh, you smell like poopy pants. And it's like, you're just a little kid doing nonsense kid stuff. He's not, but he's also just standing up for himself. And that was a very interesting, like, man, this episode is going to be disjointed as all heck, and I'm excited for it. So stop motion, puppeteering is what we're focusing on right now. And I think, if we look at our previous experiences with this podcast and puppets, Coraline.
Yeah.
We watched Coraline just about at its 15th anniversary. Mm-hmm. And in those 15 years, there were huge leaps and bounds with how puppets or how stop motion was made. A lot of 3D printing, especially now, is much more prominent. The building of puppets you could mold and move and shape to create much more lifelike facial expressions, that sort of thing. But one interesting note for this one, all of the quote-unquote human puppets, so Geppetto, even the Sebastian J. Cricket, the various wood sprites, Death, etc., they all had those mechanisms. Pinocchio just had a faceplate that they replaced over and over and over again because his face doesn't move. He's wooden. He's a wooden puppet. There's no skin involved, and so the fact that even in this very dynamic stop motion film about a puppet who becomes a real boy, the puppet that doesn't move the most is still Pinocchio. And I think there's something really fun about that.
Yeah. I think, and I think I've mentioned it, you've mentioned it, he becomes... There is no like literal moment of transformation where suddenly he is made of flesh and blood. He is a wooden puppet throughout. Yeah. But he, like the kind of like actualization of like who he is as a person, like the implication is very much clearly, no, he's a real boy. Like he's learned how to be this empathetic, kind being, helping others, being there for his family, respecting others. So I think that the idea of like this kind of dichotomy between his physical nature, but also who he is as a person, I think is absolutely interesting. When we were talking about this ahead of hitting record, the I was talking about like one little detail that we've got the desk of Sebastian J. Cricket, and he's got that little portrait at the beginning is of Arthur Schopenhauer, who's a pessimist philosopher, was a pessimist philosopher, who kind of his ideas can be summed up as, since the essence of existence is insatiable striving, and insatiable striving is suffering, non-existence is preferable to existence, which is like, why you got that on your desk, Sebastian J. Cricket? But at the end of the movie, it's replaced with a portrait of Pinocchio, Geppetto, and Spazzatura, and he's talking about how life is this wonderful gift, which is kind of this. If I kind of like keep that in mind, it becomes this kind of beautiful little like encapsulation of what the movie's trying to tell us. And yeah, like Pinocchio's not a quote unquote real boy, but he's real in all the ways that truly matter. Yeah. And there's just like using the stop motion and this puppet figure to kind of illustrate that becomes this kind of really beautiful statement about life in general. Mm-hmm. So that kind of, I don't know, I'm talking myself out of my original opinions on this, and I really enjoy it.
Incredible. Yeah, I mean, there's something also very cool about, I mean, with any Del Toro film, you can tell there's a visual signature, right? Mm-hmm. But the way that stop motion works, it is hundreds of thousands of millions of photographs, one right after the other. And there's such a tight control on the color, on the positioning, on the pacing, on how there's a moment where Geppetto punches a balloon. And you mentioned off record that like they were told to give their characters little like things that they do that are like them, that are their signature. And the fact that an animator thought, you know what would be cool? If I could figure out how to make a balloon look like it is weightless while it is being punched by a puppet. And that was a thing that they, like, those intentional moments of making them seem so very human, I think also kind of double clicks on that, like, idea of bringing the vision to life, bringing the puppets to life, and finding the magic in those little things that make us human. Because that's not his grand love for his son necessarily. I mean, it is, because he's angry and he punches this balloon, but like it's more how he is a very physical person, or how he is on this journey, on this mission to find his son and all these things. And they showed it by punching a little balloon in stop motion that they had to photograph screen by screen by screen by screen by screen. Yeah. You know? Yeah. The details of the carnival, how it's so full of life, but every single shot had to be shot because it's like a ton of photos for just 1 second of film sort of thing. And like all those little pieces and details really help to bring that very intentional vision to life. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
so cool.
Del Toro's just this guy who like loves those little details. Like every movie of his that I've seen, there's just such a focus on, I guess, the mise en scène in so many ways. Yeah. Like he's really concerned with like the costumes and the details and these little tiny things that you might otherwise not focus on. Like even when he's doing something that is so effects driven, so reliant on computer animation as Pacific Rim, like there's still those little flourishes. Like there's the scene where one of the robots winds up for a punch and then like a rocket thruster fires up on its elbow. Yes. That's the coolest thing ever in my mind. Mm-hmm. Like that is chef's kiss. Love that. Yes. And you get so many little things like that in this movie and others. Like Pinocchio burns his own feet off at the start of the movie, and I think he just has like replacement feet. Like they never really like, it's never like a full refit is done on him. He's just got these kind of like makeshift feet for the rest of the movie. So I don't know, just like little tiny things that would otherwise be glossed over or otherwise fixed. I think Del Toro's kind of interested in the wrinkles of it all. And I love that. I really love that. And I think the kind of like messiness of the setting, it just lends itself to this kind of different read on things that we were talking about, that you like just through talking about it with you. I'm really like, no, you have a point. Maybe the setting is not as important as it was, as it might have seemed to me initially. So I think, yeah, it's a very detail oriented movie that's still kind of more focused on the big picture, I guess would be my one sentence summation in some ways.
I can see that. I think too, like, if we're looking at, mise en scène, I would also harken back to last week with High and Low, where Kurosawa always has someone moving in the background to keep it interesting.
Yeah.
And Spettatore didn't have to jump and climb and run across the entire carnival of moving performers, but he did, and you see every single moment of that. You didn't have to have like a whole war game in the middle of the movie, or I think multiple versions of Pinocchio's performance in the carnival, with all of the kids being animated, with Mussolini and his big bowl of popcorn, like all these things. But we do. We see the rubbish that's left behind from the carnival, not just the carnival and the whimsy itself. And all of those things that make us human, that make life worth living or not, or, whatever, are the focus of this. And the war is secondary, I think, in the way that it's presented, even in the film. Because, I mean, the biggest, like, most notable thing we see about the war that really brings it into focus is the puppet play. The propaganda that Count Felipe is making Pinocchio perform in. Pinocchio doesn't know what war is, really. He hasn't learned that yet.
Yeah.
But all it is a show. That's all it is to him, and maybe that's all it is to us too.
Yeah. It's not so, like we've talked about it. He doesn't so much speak truth to power as he's like, yeah, you're a smelly butthead.
Yeah.
And he calls Mussolini Il Duce. He calls him Il Dolce. The soft one or the sweet one, I think is the translation, which is very funny. Just like, and the way that the movie kind of dunks on Mussolini is also deeply funny. Yeah, I mean, it's these little, like, I don't know where I'm going with this, but there's so much in here that's just kind of, so many little details that kind of like enrich the experience, even if they're not necessarily contributing to that greater whole. But maybe the point of enriching the experience is the greater whole that we're talking about.
Yeah. But the fact that he actually, and the animators actually put those details in, because these aren't actors that are just doing their thing. These are puppeteers who are meticulously planning and then building scenes photo by photo by photo. They are intentional.
Oh, yeah.
And that's beautiful.
Yes.
That's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Just like every choice that is made is a choice. Like everything that is included. There's not necessarily an improvised element in here. Because it's just like that's not the nature of stop motion. So, I think that like that the kind of looking at it through that lens, this idea of like every little detail is adding some element of beauty to this film, which I think kind of supports that idea of like life is beautiful and fleeting.
Yep.
Being this kind of central message that it's trying to convey.
Yeah. I think that is a great place to pivot to retelling of stories more broadly, and how retelling stories can change the meaning, can change the impact, and, the meaning itself can change as the world around it changes. And we've got a couple notes here that we wanted to kind of kick off with. And the first one, I think, suits really well what you just said about life being fleeting, because as I mentioned in the summary, Geppetto is a woodworker who presumably had a wife who passed away because he has a son. And his son is probably 8 or so. I'm bad at kid ages. But he is killed in a bombing in the church during World War I. And so Geppetto mourns for 20-odd years. He grows a pine tree next to Carlo, his son's grave. And then one night in a drunken, I don't want to say rage, but a drunken romp, I don't know, Geppetto makes Pinocchio a very rough puppet compared to the others that he's made. And the next morning, he discovers this very strange, very kind of scary looking puppet is alive in his house. And he's not exactly happy about it. Like, he locks him in a closet, then goes to church. And he's like, just stay here. And then Pinocchio is nothing but trouble for him. And at least in the Disney version, which is the one that most folks are familiar with, Geppetto intentionally crafts Pinocchio to look like a little boy, just a puppet version of a little boy. He looks much more human. He has hair instead of a crown of branches. He's got actual limbs instead of sticks that he's just kind of stuck on and put rough hinges in. And even just starting out life as an accident, sort of. A wish that was not made, really, for this Pinocchio versus the other movie, which is like, oh no, this dude really wants a little son. Not to replace anybody, just to have a son. Is a very interesting shift in how Geppetto then cares for, and I use that loosely a little bit in the beginning, Pinocchio. Because he has moments where he is like, goes into dad mode, you know, where he like sits him down and Pinocchio asks him, this is a line that I'm glad that I can sneak in here. Pinocchio asks him, like, Geppetto's working on this big Jesus statue that had been left unfinished for many years since his son died. And Pinocchio says to Geppetto, why do they like him, but they don't like me? Because we're both made of wood. And Geppetto actually sits down and like talks to him about that. A lot of the other times, though, and then up and until he's like, he tells Pinocchio he is a burden, which is like, oh, my heart. Geppetto is not a good father to Pinocchio. He assumes that he is going to become full-formed as Carlo, who he'd already put in all the work to teach him how to be a good boy. A real boy. And he has no patience for it. And it's so, like, that start, and I know Del Toro spoke about this in a couple of articles that I read about how much this resonated for him, that his father expected him to kind of appear fully formed as a human that knew the ways of the world and sent him off into the world, and he went, oh no. And that resonated a lot with Del Toro. And so that change really makes that very clear. Like, he expected this little boy to just appear, be alive, and just be the good boy that Carlo was without doing any of the work to make that real. Yeah.
The idea of like a more grounded in some ways take on, you know, this kind of modern fairy tale of like, hey, yeah, you wanted a real boy, you made this puppet and it's just come to life. That's a little terrifying. So I think everyone's response to that is probably you know, fairly grounded in how most people would respond to a puppet suddenly walking and talking around them. And I think this kind of unspoken wish that is made true by, like, you know, a biblically accurate fairy is the best way I could describe this character. Kind of be like, well, he wants his son back. Here you go. With no real like thought or consideration given to the consequences of that, and no real thought on Geppetto's part to, he just wants Carlo back fully formed. He does not necessarily want the replacement. And I think that is like the kind of central conflict between him and Pinocchio. And obviously they overcome it. It's very sweet and beautiful at the end. But yeah, man, you know, it really shifts one of the issues I have with the original story, is that, yeah, like Pinocchio is just this little bratty id monster. But in this, it's like, well, like, yeah, of course he is, because he has no, like, there's no real parenting going on here. Versus in the original stories where it's like Geppetto is parenting him, he's just still a brat. Like, the original story, the talking cricket is murdered by Pinocchio, who, like, throws a shoe at him or something.
Oh, God.
So, like, yeah, I just have... I really enjoy this the more that I'm talking about it and thinking about it. It is... I don't know, there's so much going on here. So much going on here, and I don't think I was properly giving it credit when I was, like, watching it for that first time. I was like, oh, well, you know...
Yeah, it's a puppet.
Really,
He's
yeah,
annoying.
whatever. Yeah, whatever. But yeah, there's a lot going on here, and I'm really enjoying it. And yeah, just like the kind of shift to that kind of focus on those relationships we have with the people that we care about. The Podesta and his son Candlewick are, I mean, that's kind of heartbreaking at times. Great performances, because it's Ron Perlman voices the Podesta, and Finn Wolfhard of Stranger Things fame is Candlewick. Candlewick also kind of starts off as like such a bratty kid, but very much in that way that kids are. And the kind of end of his little arc and sequence of the movie, you know, he and Pinocchio have formed like a genuine friendship and a bond that kind of like overcomes this very paternalistic, you know, no, you must support the state. Also, now shoot your puppet friend. There can only be one winner. We can't tie. Is heartbreaking. And then we don't see Candlewick again after that, which is also a little heartbreaking.
Yeah, there's one thing that is my kind of one of my favorite bits in the film for a multitude of reasons. Of the two of them late at night, Candlewick and Pinocchio, just chatting. And it's very clear, both through the interactions that we've seen before, but also in the conversation they're having, is that Candlewick he just wants to live up to his daddy's expectations. That's all he wants. He wants his daddy to love him. And, you know, Pinocchio quotes
they want the same
something.
Thing.
Yeah. And Pinocchio quotes something that Sebastian J. Cricket said earlier of like, sometimes fathers say things because they're hurt, but they realize they don't mean them. And he tells that to Candlewick. And it just, there's this healing of trauma and like passing down of familial like trauma that is really interesting. And they don't, I mean, there's a lot of healing and love and resolution just throughout the film. But this one little moment of hurt boys become hurt men. But you can heal that pain through introspection, through forgiveness, blah, blah, blah. The fact that they included that and then they become friends and they basically, they solve war, quote unquote, right? Like they both got the flag at the same time. Oh, we both won. And the Podesta's like, no, one of you has to be dead and you're the one that can come back to life because that would be a waste of a soldier. Shoot him. And it's like, whoa.
Yeah.
We could solve war if we just understood each other better, and you're just trying to get us to shoot our friends. What is up with that? Like, it's that the underpinning of pain and the way we manage and talk through pain and being afraid and all that stuff is a very. It's not a central theme, but is a through line of this entire film, and I love the way they bring that out.
Yeah, I mean, Spazzatura as well becomes family with Pinocchio and Geppetto. Starts off antagonistic, does not like this weird puppet boy, is also threatened by him because Spazzatura is the talent that handles Volpe's puppet shows. But like, Pinocchio doesn't really like clock that, I guess. Yeah. He's just like, oh, well, like Spazzatura is my monkey friend.
Yeah.
And when Pinocchio gets shot by by Mussolini's bodyguard, he's kind of like looped Spazzatura in on this plot. Like, no. This is the new show we're gonna do to make fun of this guy. And Spazzatura goes along with it. And there's also something to be said about like Spazzatura is borderline nonverbal. Like, just, I mean, Spazzatura is a monkey, so that also plays a role. But like, this is also a world where there's a talking cricket. So, Spazzatura is not able. The only way Spazzatura is able to communicate with Pinocchio is by like wearing masks and using puppets, and has like explicit dialogue through these characters to explain Volpe's deal, like what's going on, which kind of like it really invites this reading of like, oh, so Volpe's an abusive parent towards this monkey. Like that's kind of the read I have on that. Mm-hmm. And the fact that these two child figures overcome their differences again, like this is a thing that he does with Candlewick as well. Like they become family, and yeah, it's a really lovely through line through this.
So part of that as part of being part of that family, that's a weird sentence. Pinocchio does a lot of dying on behalf of his family, despite the fact that he is immortal, or because he's immortal. Who can say? The first time is accidental, right? As we said before, the Podesta hits him with a truck while some folks are fighting over him. But later on, he is attempting to save his father, save Sebastian, and save Spacciatura. And so, like, that change, because in the original Disney version, he only dies one time at the end, and it's kind of accidental because he just dies because they were in a giant whale. But like in this film, particularly the last two, but mostly the last one, where he chooses to become mortal and he chooses to die to save his family. Mm-hmm. There's obvious Christian overtones.
Yeah.
But I mean, most religions have some kind of death or version of sacrifice for the people that you love or whatever. But the fact that they included this in the context of a community where, you know, we have very clear Catholic iconology, because of course it is Italy. And the fact that, on the other hand, the Podesta was trying to get him to die for his country. So we have church, we have country, and then we have family. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the family death was the one that really mattered at the end, I think, is a fun's a word. The fact that the family death is the one that makes him a real boy because he realizes the value of life. Even if it is fleeting, even if it is terrible and wonderful, and it's made up of a million different vignettes of a million different weird little things. Making it so that he learns that throughout the course of the film, rather than just at the end, it's kind of a, oh, he's a real boy now, I think is really, was a really cool choice by Del Toro and the rest of the writing team to say, you know, if you were immortal and you were a little boy and you could climb every giant tree you wanted, you could join the circus, you could do whatever you wanted, what would you do? And would you ever choose to die? What is the value of that to you? And I love that is how they have framed that choice at the end, for him to actually say, I am going to choose to sacrifice myself for the people that I love. Mm-hmm. And that makes it so much more impactful that it is his choice rather than just like an accident of, whoops, I got eaten by a whale and broke in half or something, you know.
Yeah, I think that just like again, I'm coming back to that, like that message of like life is a wonderful gift. Like the movie is so explicit in that being this thematic center, particularly towards the end. And the fact that it's a gift that Pinocchio gives to the people he cares about. Yeah. And then he is gifted it in return through recognition of what he's done. Also, Sebastian J. Cricket browbeats these mystical beings, and he's like, hang on. some BS that you're not letting them come back. These kids learned so much.
Yeah.
So it's just a truly. I think I still struggle with the source material for sure, but I think this is, if I have to pick like a take on it, this is the one I'm going for. I really enjoy what this movie's doing, what it has to say, and yeah, it's just nice. It's just
Honestly,
like
yeah.
The ending is just like a warm blanket of like, it kind of like washes away any cynicism you have about what might have preceded it.
Yeah.
At least in my view.
Yeah, the fact that he returns again immortal and is able to care for his father and Spezzatura and for not Jiminy Cricket, Sebastian J. Cricket, till they die, and that he carries Sebastian around inside him, literally in his little chest cavity, as if he is his heart, is just like, oh, stop it. But that is not the end of the film, though, because of course we actually cut to our narrator, Sebastian J. Cricket, who is telling the tale of Pinocchio to the 4 rabbits of death, I guess, as they're playing cards. And Ewan McGregor finally gets to sing his own song, which...
Yeah, he's cut off like 3 times through the rest of the movie. Then he sings it over the credits.
Yeah, there's a sort of meta gloriousness of... Because I remember the first time watching this, I was like, oh yeah, Ewan McGregor, great. And then he starts to sing, I'm like, yes, let's go. And then he gets squished, I think, or something. I just like, God, I'm so glad. By the end, you're like, yes, let me listen to all these credits because I want to hear him sing. Finally. But yeah, it was, anyway, that was a little divergence. But also, the warm blanket also is then with, like, we talked a little bit about tension last episode. We end with everybody dead except for Pinocchio, and Pinocchio goes his own way into the world to find his place, I believe is what Sebastian says. But that levity at the end with a singing, dancing cricket playing poker with some rabbits in death is just so good. It's just, it relieves tension so beautifully. Hard pivot. We are getting very near to the end, but I think we need to close out talking about Mussolini's Italy, because obviously that is a big part of this film.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. Asterisk. And 2 kind of notable moments or divergences, because in the Disney version and in the book, the boys, Pinocchio goes to the circus. He has his circus mischief. Obviously, Pinocchio performs for Mussolini. He gets shot, and then it's burned to the ground. But then, Pleasure Island, after that, or what was Pleasure Island in the Disney version in the book, is actually a training facility for little boys to turn them into soldiers.
Yeah.
And I think we've covered this throughout mostly, but like the fact that they have created this backdrop of World War II Italy, and the pieces that are relevant to Pinocchio show up. That is to say, Mussolini is there. That is to say, we get, the training facility where they're very clearly like doing the fascist salute, where there are bombings throughout that kill various groups of children, or that destroy cities or whatever. Like there's a lot of parts of war.
Mm-hmm.
But we never really get the big picture of what that means politically. And I know you and I have differed in our opinions on this, because I think that's great insofar as if you're a little kid, war doesn't mean anything to you except for maybe you go hungry, or maybe, your parents go away, or your big brother goes away, or like you notice the things that change in your life, but war doesn't necessarily like register on that grander scale because you're a kid and because your parents shelter you from it, and all these different reasons. But I know when we first started chatting, you wanted more from the backdrop that is fascist Italy.
Mhm.
So where have you landed after almost 2 hours of talking about this movie of Mussolini's Italy, Pinocchio? Should we be beating up more Nazis? Let's go.
I mean, on the last point, yes, always, absolutely. Punch the Nazis. Do like Indiana Jones. I think we were talking about how the choice to update the setting. I mean, obviously it's a choice. Every decision that goes into making a film is a choice. Some of those choices will have more weight behind them than others. So the decision to update the setting to Mussolini's Italy means something. And I think you and I were talking a bit about how the original setting for the original story is kind of that industrialization. That's kind of the backdrop for so much that's going on when this story is originally written. And I think that updating it to Italy in the 40s, the 30s and 40s it's a different sort of industrialization. It's a different sort of machinery operating to transform the nation. But simultaneously, that choice matters, but is immaterial at the same time. You know, it has an influence on the lessons we will learn or the themes that we will mine from something, but it's also kind of, as I was talking about earlier, and I think we've both kind of landed in a similar position. I'm almost doing a 180 at this point, I think. But, you know, the idea that this backdrop and this setting is more about highlighting that message of, you know, morality, of humanity, empathy for others, it kind of becomes the central thesis. Or, well, maybe not that, but more the central thesis being like life is beautiful and fleeting. And something we were talking about before we hit record, we keep referring to this wonderful conversation that we had, is this notion that, like, yeah, bad things happen in the world, but we continue to live through it. Life continues to go on, even amidst the bad. And I think that is the kind of like powerful message to me. Like, yeah, bad things happen. You got to stand up to the bad things, but you also have to live your life. You cannot live your life worrying about the bad things. Mm-hmm. Like all these, you know, I think I've complained to you in conversations that we've had elsewhere about like the idea that like getting pretty tired of living through unprecedented times, but it's like everyone goes through that. Every time up until now is brand new. Like it's all unprecedented. We are all living through it. So this movie kind of like focusing on the beauty in life, the joy in life that you can find and hold on to, I think really resonates with me the more I think about it. So I've kind of abandoned my initial opinion at the start of this, huh?
No. Yeah, I mean, the kind of to that, and like life is beautiful, but then the main reason or the main message that Pinocchio teaches Sebastian, Sebastian teaches Pinocchio, and Sebastian then uses to argue for Pinocchio's quote-unquote real boyhood is all we can do is our best. Mm-hmm. All anyone can do is your best, right? And that's, you know, the best you can do. And if we look at things like right now, it's... we are living in unprecedented times, and yet here you and I are recording a movie podcast about a stop-motion movie that was released 3 years ago that was based on a story from 200 years ago, you know? Yeah. And life goes on. We have to shovel the snow. We have to pay our bills. We have to buy groceries. We have to clean the litter box, you know? Mm-hmm. And yet, there's all sorts of stuff going on in the world. And I think there's, you know, an argument to be made that, you know, it's important to, particularly as an adult, to be aware of the world in which you live and yes, do your best to help the people in need near you and do your best to create a world wherein we're all, you know, whatever free means, but like we're free to be ourselves, to be loved for who we are, et cetera, et cetera. God, I don't mean to be so preachy, but also like if you can't, sometimes you just do your best, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's the best you can do, right? Like
Yeah.
there's something beautiful about that, and that story is agnostic to anything. That could have been, a World War One. They could have made it a World War One movie. They could have made it a, I don't know, Russian Revolution movie. They could have made it I don't know, whatever. Literally any war or any time of strife. It could have been based in the Lord of the Rings universe. There could have been a side plot, and there could have been a hobbit who just really wanted a son, and they made a little tiny puppet. And it could have been Pinocchio, but in Middle Earth, It's the same story. And Mussolini's Italy, it gives us context because we know what Mussolini's Italy was. We know the time period of World War II. But, he's a little kid just kind of trying to be a kid. And as adults, we try to shelter kids from that stuff. And if he notices some of it, great, but he doesn't even understand a lot of it, even though we do. So, yeah, I don't know. Like,
yeah, I think, like, you brought up Lord of the Rings, so, I gotta...
Yes.
It's like all that we have, all that we can do is, gosh, I'm embarrassed that I can't remember the quote, but the idea of, like, all that we can do is choose what to do with the time that we are given. Like, the notion that no one wants to live through the difficult times, but we still have to navigate them.
Yep.
And, I think maybe that is the big takeaway I have for this movie.
Mm-hmm. On the beating up of Nazis, because I'm sorry, that came out funny. I just want to, the thing that I want to close on this topic for myself, just for my own edification, is that when he says, do my best, he's just trying to do his best to be himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all of his acts of resistance, all of his asking why, like, you have to do this, why? Just those little moments of resistance that he doesn't even clock as resistance, that are just him living his life, I think is a much bigger message, even if it is just, it's a very small one. But, like, it's like that grain of sand that's in your shoe between your heel and, like, the back, and eventually it's a giant blister sort of thing. That's the vibe I get from how Pinocchio's quote-unquote, like, misbehaving. He's just asking why. And, like, that's great. Like, keep that up. Keep that going as an adult. And doing his best to be himself, ergo creates those moments of resistance, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah. Plus, like, if Pinocchio went all John Wick on fascists, there's no one for Indiana Jones to beat up. So
that's true. It would ruin the whole. That's our hour, and we have so much more we could talk about. Maybe we should one day release bonus episodes on something like this, where it is just a big old thing that we could talk about. But alas, we need to start closing up. And so, Ben, if you want to dig into close reading, if you want to dig into analyses, retelling of tales, all that stuff, why is this the film to watch, or a film to watch?
I think that this movie, as has been evidenced by my shifting opinion on it over the last hour, and obviously for people who were not flies on the wall for our initial conversation, over the last, like, 3 hours, honestly, this movie has a lot more going on than I've probably given it credit for. I think it's been really interesting to reconcile my initial thoughts with some of the perspectives you've brought to the table, and other ideas that we've kind of uncovered through this discussion. So I think that, like, this is a great movie to look at if you just kind of want to start flexing those muscles a little bit more. That would be my recommendation. But Farrah, if you're just looking to watch something on a Friday night, why this one?
I think this version of Pinocchio, Guillermo del Toro does such a beautiful job of taking a story that we are all kind of culturally familiar with and giving it new life. It is colorful. The songs are fun and plucky. They're not memorable necessarily, but they're beautiful. It is artwork on the screen, which is a theme we'll be talking about in a few weeks. And I think if you want to see what can be done with stop motion, even as an art form by itself, watch this movie and watch the little bonus episode thing they put together for how they made this movie, because it is so cool. Oh my goodness. But I love stop motion, so like I'm a little biased here, but it's very cool.
Awesome.
All right.
Awesome.
Okay, so on to, you can find us at Patreon, at Coffee and Kurosawa. I can pivot. You can also find us on Blue Sky as Coffee Kurosawa Pod. You can find me, Farrah Sarpkaya, on Blue Sky and Letterboxd as Farrahkaya, and at sarpkaya.ca, where I lend my voice as a voice actor.
And I am on Blue Sky as at the Benjimon, and on Letterboxd as at Benjimon, where I've been logging everything I've watched this year. Enjoy if you want. Yeah.
Amazing. And where are we going next on our movie adventures, Ben?
If you want to watch along at home, the next few movies we are looking at are George Lucas's Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, Vincent Ward's What Dreams May Come, and then we are shaking things up a little bit. We're going to have an episode where we talk about what got us into film, some of our personal favorites, and what we look for when we are trying to decide what to watch on a Friday night.
We are just 2 episodes into season 2, and we are just getting started. So grab your coffee, grab your popcorn. If you're Ben, grab your Twizzler nubs as we talk all things film. Thanks for listening.